Thank you so much for joining us today. You know, yesterday we were in San Diego, California, talking with one of the country's most notorious drug dealers, Mr. Ricky Ross, better known as Freeway Rick. Take a look at this tape.
I think I'm an expert on cocaine. There's not many people that has dealt with as much cocaine as I have. I think I'm an expert. I've saw people strung out from snorting cocaine, where they snort cocaine all day long. I saw them take powder and put it in cigarettes and smoke it, just like a rock smoker will. And they'll smoke back to back to back.
Well, Ricky Ross is right now facing a life sentence, but he says he deserves to be a free man. Why? Because he says the CIA used him as a pawn to sell drugs to help fund a secret war in Nicaragua. Take a look at this tape.
If it was good for them to sell drugs, then it should have been good for me to sell drugs. The money from the drugs went to buy guns for the Contras.
Now, Ricky Ross compared himself to Superfly, the character from the 1970s movie, who seemed to have it all.
Cocaine was like a situation like party, you know, like have fun, you know, like it's like just being cool, you know. It wasn't nothing negative about it, you know. It was never, we didn't ever see a crack mother. It wasn't no crack mothers. It wasn't nobody strung out on cocaine. It was like the people that was buying, you know, made $500, $600 a week, drove brand new cars, had nice looking women, wore nice clothes, you know what I'm saying?
But Ricky Ross lost it all when he was arrested on cocaine trafficking charges last year. And Ricky Ross is right now at the center of one of the country's biggest controversies when it comes to drug. And I'm going to tell you something, if this controversy continues to escalate the way it has, and it will, I think this country is going to stop for a second and say it's wake-up call time. I think right now what we need to do is try to figure out whether or not there's any truth to this. So today we're going to discuss it. And my first guest worked for the government of the United States, for the Drug Enforcement Agency, for 25 years. He recently wrote a book called Triangle of Death, which he wrote and says it was written as fiction because if you had written it as fact, well, please welcome Mr. Michael Levine to the show. You know, if you had written this book as a fact and told some of the true stories that you could tell, what would happen?
I just couldn't. Let me explain why.
Certainly.
I was a deep cover agent. Deep cover agents are a small group of people who pose as criminals and go into other countries. For instance, the Arab terrorist role in the book is one I actually played. And we are sent into these countries to live on our acting ability. There's no 911 to call. The mission is to reach the top of the drug world. And I was a deep cover agent. I lived with Chinese drug dealers in Bangkok, Thailand during the Vietnam War. I lived with ex-Nazis and Argentine mass murderers in Argentina.
Well, at that time you weren't a DEA agent.
No, I was in the hard narcotics smuggling unit of customs. And the case that I was living with these Chinese drug dealers led me right to Chiang Mai. It was the first case that was killed by Central Intelligence. Ironically, it was a case that involved the smuggling of heroin into the U.S. in the dead bodies of GIs. Now, this was my first instance where I was brought into the embassy in the middle of the night. I was being forced by my government, mysteriously, suddenly to lie to the drug dealers. All logistic support was withdrawn. And the drug dealers had bought my act. I get over pretty good. I grew up in the South Bronx. My brother was a heroin addict. As a matter of fact, I grew up, I'm a Jew who grew up in a Puerto Rican black neighborhood. And as a kid, I used to lie and say I'm half Puerto Rican. So I was kind of undercover, like right away, right from the get-go. It was good training.
You trained yourself well from a young age.
And I was a bad kid. I was arrested twice before I was 16. Had I been arrested 1 week later, I could never have been a federal agent. They were considered juvenile offenses. I wanted to live out a James Bond fantasy. I got into a fight with a guy who was a heavyweight boxer, a martial artist when I was in the military. And in a heartbeat, I learned how short life is. The guy pulled a gun, stuck it in my stomach. A fellow military policeman pulled the trigger and it misfired. From that time on, I wanted to live out every fantasy I could, and I aimed myself to be a deep cover agent. Well, there's a poor kid from the Bronx. How do you get to live that kind of life? And I did. I lived out every fantasy you could imagine.
And over 25 years, you did this all over the world.
All over the world. Every country we name in the book, I was there.
And name the countries that you name in the book.
Well, from Bangkok, Thailand, Buenos Aires, Argentina. I lived there for 3 years. Mexico, Colombia, Panama, Bolivia, Germany, France, you name it. I've been there posing as a criminal. And in every case, including probably the biggest case in our history, I reached the top of the drug world. And to go back to the original question, and let me get to what happened when I reached the top of the drug world. The original question is, why can't I tell this as nonfiction? Well, when you become a deep cover agent, you're in violation of these countries' laws. If you screw up, you die. There's no doubt about it, and agents have died. In fact, the death I write about, the tortured death, one that's linked to CIA, comes from real life. You die. So the one rule that you live by is, and they tell this to you, resolve every situation in your own favor. And it is better to be tried by 12 than carried by 6. Now, when you live that rule, even though I was watching my brother die, a heroin addict, die inch by inch, and even though I believed I was doing right, I knew I was doing a lot of wrong things to survive. Anybody who does that has to survive, has to do everything they can. Now, the point is, when you live by that rule, you can't come out and talk about it. So you unwittingly join the U.S. government mafia, of which part the CIA is the kingpin, the Don.
So you're saying that the CIA is the kingpin of the head of the United States Mafia?
Look, I've put thousands of people in jail, thousands. DEA gave a British writer once 3,000. It was a lot more than that. I've never failed in putting a case before court, conspiracy cases, undercover cases. I've never lost a case. You know, in every one of these cases, what I'm talking about is I have a lot of credibility. I live by my credibility. So when I say I have personal testimony about Central Intelligence killing, murdering cases, one case, the biggest drug case I think in our history, Operation Trifecta, was a case where, posing as a mafia don, Luis Miguel Garcia, we went to Bolivia. We plugged into a pipeline of massive amounts of cocaine going from Bolivia through Mexico with the protection of the Mexican army into California. Both the CIA and the State Department and the Justice Department ganged up to kill that case.
To stop the case?
To murder that case. Absolutely. Why? Murder that case. Well, there's several reasons. First, all I can do is testify as I would in federal court as to what happened. I'm in Panama. We ordered 15 tons of cocaine to go through Mexico, be paid for in Panama, into the U.S. from Bolivia.
Stop there for a second, Michael. You're in Panama. You are a deep cover agent for the United States.
Suddenly, all logistics support is taken away.
But wait a second. But they told you, as a deep cover agent, to buy cocaine and send it through this country and bring it into the United States of America.
Yeah, to catch... The cocaine was never intended to reach the U.S. It was going to be sold to undercover agents. The important thing to know is that we plugged into a pipeline that existed for years.
Okay.
And that pipeline, massive amounts of cocaine were flowing from Bolivia, also Colombia. We learned that during this investigation. Massive amounts were going onto the streets of the U.S. At that time, I already knew my daughter was a cocaine addict. I had already lost, my brother at that time had already committed suicide. Wrote a note to my family and friends, I just can't stand the drugs anymore, 19 years of addiction. So there I am at the biggest case in our history, at the top of the drug world. I'm in Panama, in a country that was being run by a CIA employee, basically, Manuel Noriega, and my government suddenly withdraws logistics support, and I and then the other Chicano-Mexican undercover agent, we were forced to lie. We were forced to lie to these people who could kill us in a heartbeat, because our government had withdrawn logistics support. In a screaming argument I had midnight, and I describe it in a non-fiction book, my DEA supervisor tells me, as an explanation, the CIA is in this in 4 countries. We're not telling you everything.
Okay, no, wait, I got to hold you there for a second. I have to take a break. But the reason why Michael is here today is because we are going to talk about this entire thing that's rumbling all over America. Was the CIA responsible for, in any way, shape, or form, funneling cocaine into the United States of America, helping to turn it into crack, and turning it into what is now devastated the majority of the inner cities of America? A lot of people say that this is just another bull case drawn up by black people who are just so paranoid to say that everything is a conspiracy. But today you're going to meet several people who are former employees of our United States government, people who have looked at this over years, who will say, whether it was a conspiracy or not, they don't want to talk about it. But did the CIA know that drugs were coming into the United States of America and help it get here? The answer to the question is yes.
Absolutely.
Does the CIA do this on a regular basis? The answer to the question is
Absolutely. I wish I could take them to court.
and right now, just by virtue of the fact that Montel Williams is doing this show, someone is going to say, you see, it's another black journalist who is feeding into the conspiracy story. And most of you who know me know I'm probably one of the most conservative people in this country. I spent 20 years in the United States government working for the military. This show is about finding some truth and saying to the American people, let us get the answers that we demand, because it's our dollars that paid to bring Coke to America. We'll be back right after this. We're talking today, this is really a show about what we can call rumors. The rumor that the CIA was involved in making sure that cocaine made it to the streets of South Central LA back in the early 80s, and then helped to develop and turn it into crack, which was then spread across America, and is the reason why most of our inner cities are in the plight that they are in. And a lot of this has been out there for years, but it wasn't until recently that the story broke again. And my next guest is a reporter, not from San Diego, California, but from San Jose Mercury News, and he wrote a story called The Dark Alliance. Please welcome Mr. Gary Webb to the show. And Gary, this really, I think the current fervor over this issue is because of your article. A lot of people may not be familiar with what the Dark Alliance meant and stands for. Why don't you tell America what the story is about first, and then we'll talk about the issues.
It was about a cocaine ring that operated along the west coast of the United States throughout most of the 80s. And they were funneling, they were selling cocaine in South Central. They were also selling it in Oakland. They were selling it in San Francisco. They were selling it in San Jose. And some of the money they were making was going to support an army that the men who ran the cocaine ring worked for, called the FDN. This was an army that the CIA started in 1981 and supported.
Better known to us, most of us who remember news, the Contras from Nicaragua. So go right ahead.
The men that were running the cocaine ring were top officials of this Contra army. And what we found was that they were selling this stuff in South Central, which is, predominantly black section of Los Angeles, immediately before the outbreak of the crack cocaine epidemic. They started selling powder. Tons and tons and tons of powder cocaine was going into this one small area of the city. And from there, they sold it to Freeway Rick. And Freeway Rick took the powder, turned it into crack, and starting in 1983, 1984, began distributing it to predominantly the gangs, the Crips and the Bloods in Los Angeles. And they spread it, from there.
From there. Now, since this has happened, you have butted heads with everybody in Washington, D.C., trying to get information about the story. Have you not?
Yeah, we worked on this for a year, and it was only because, some people at National Archives believe freedom of information means freedom of information. We got some documents that showed that pretty strongly that there were some CIA connections to this.
Let's talk a little bit about those documents for a second, because there's a gentleman, this figure that we talked about yesterday on the show. His name is Blandone. Danilo Blandone, who was a person who was a member of the aristocracy of Nicaragua before the fall of Somoza, and then he fled and comes to the United States and decides, while he's in the United States, so you can all understand this, he wants to raise money for the revolutionaries who are trying to overthrow the government that just overthrew them. So here in the United States, they try to do fundraisers, and that doesn't work, and then Blandone gets a scheme. Well, I can get some cocaine cheaply with some help from some of my friends and get it into the United States of America. All I need to find is somebody who can sell it. So they find a gentleman by the name of Rick Ross, who is Freeway Rick. Rick Ross comes in and starts selling cocaine at the terms beginning 1 or 2 grams, and within weeks 2, 3, 4 kilos a week. Within months, what was it, 10 to 15 kilos a day. Ricky Ross was selling cocaine to the point of making $3 to $4 million a day. He sold so much cocaine, it hurt his fingers to count the money. Not only in Los Angeles, but in Cincinnati, in St. Louis, all the way across America. So some can say, and this is the reason why people are so angry at you in your article, is that Ricky Ross, the dope dealer, was supplied by the CIA because Blandón was an operative for the CIA, correct?
Blandón and Meneses were working for an army that was a wholly owned subsidiary of the CIA. They were meeting with CIA agents. Blandón, and this came out in court. I mean, Danilo Blandón is now a government witness. He works for the Drug Enforcement Administration. And we've paid him, I don't know, $166,000 over the last 18 months because he's such a good informant. So they put him on the witness stand in Ricky Ross's case. And he testified that in 1981, he went to Honduras. He met with the commander, the military commander of the CIA's army, and he was instructed to go raise money in California for this Contra army. And he was told that the ends justified the means.
And those ends being sell cocaine if you have to.
Well, look, he was in the room with the Nicaraguan representative of the Cali cartel, Mr. Meneses, and he was in the room with a government marketing expert named Danilo Blandón. Now, if they weren't talking about selling cocaine, I don't know what they were talking about.
And this is all information they can find on the website. I have to use that website, but on a website on the internet. So we're going to put that up so people can go and
look at these documents
take a look at the documents yourself and judge it. But Michael, now, I mean, there's a stretch here. Here's a guy who is obviously a CIA operative, Mr. Blandón, who is working with this government-backed army that we've kind of created in Nicaragua. But how the heck does this guy get to bring in tons of cocaine? When I say ton, I'm talking tons. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 tons of cocaine weekly in the United States of America for 7 years, and no one can ever catch him.
Well, number one, Mr. Meneses was actually indicted in 1984. He was known within, my own sources in DEA told me he was known as el rey de la droga, the king of drugs. He was in more than 40 files and indicted mysteriously, and people within DEA say that it was CIA intervention that kept this sealed indictment from ever being opened. So he was well known. He's well known. The connection between him, Blandón, and Calero, who was the head of the Nicaraguan government in exile, is clear. There's a clear evidentiary.
We got a picture of it.
Yeah, there's a clear evidentiary trail. Now, if you want to follow that trail up, you have to first understand how CIA and DEA work. I was a country attaché assigned to Argentina. Now, during those years, there were people who I inherited on the payroll who were murderers. They were also on the CIA payroll. So,
Murderers on the CIA payroll.
Not only murderers, I'm talking about mass murderers. And I wrote about it in books that I thought would have America marching on Washington. Nothing ever
Michael,
happened.
how are you alive today?
A miracle. Just absolutely.
Why didn't the CIA bump you off before you came to the Montel Williams show? Because to me, they will say tomorrow, he's a kook, he's crazy, don't believe anything he has to say, don't worry about it, there's no conspiracy.
Well, at the same time, DEA called me one of their best in a New York Times article. The only thing I can say, Montel, I lost my son, I lost my brother because of this phony CIA-backed drug flow. Somebody once said that if you don't have anything in your life to die for, you don't have anything to live for. And after losing my son, that's the story of my life. God bless Gary Webb. I've been trying to tell this, and other DEA agents are now coming out trying to tell this story.
Let me take a break. When we come back, we got a lot of people who disagree with all of this. They're here today. We're going to have a good argument. We'll be back right after this.